Welcome to AskBYS Podcast, a monthly podcast brought to you by Bainbridge Youth Services and its supporting sponsors. AskBYS Podcast connects parents to professionals that can provide support, education, and resources on a particular topic in parenting. The speaker's words and opinions are their own and do not represent the policies or opinions of BYS. My name is Shannon Ameling, and I am your host. I am here with Milagro Castilleja as our producer. We're recording live at the Media Arts Studio at BARN, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. Today's episode is sponsored by Quick Lock and Windermere Realty of Bainbridge Island. We're happy to welcome our parent guest, Martin Maggio, a Bainbridge Island resident and father of two.
Hi.
Welcome. And our professional guest, Aalesa Barker, Winslow Way branch manager of the Umpqua Bank.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Today's episode is Financial Literacy for Children, Preparing Youth for the Future. We'll turn it over to Martin.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, Aalesa, I guess we're going to get right to it. So we talk about financial literacy, and it covers such a broad thing. So we'll boil it back a little bit. When we talk about financial literacy for children and young adults, what exactly sort of things are we covering? Since it can cover such a big ground, is there something really for the, like my son's a senior, something that focuses on that, getting him ready?
So when we talk about financial literacy, it's an important part of life because just like establishing healthy eating habits, establishing healthy spending habits and saving habits is key to de-stressing your life and having a path and a plan. And so financial literacy, you're never too young to start learning. And honestly, you're never too old to start learning. And so it's a continual process. Things change. I think about when we were young, were there apps for going to Starbucks?
Right.
No. So yeah, no matter what your age, what your financial background is, having a path and a plan, and knowing how to live within your means and not go beyond is very helpful in life. And I think that all starts with how to keep track of your money and don't spend beyond your means, understanding basic financial concepts like needs and wants, budgeting habits, making a plan for your finances, how to make informed financial decisions, and investing.
Okay, yeah, so I think we'll delve into some of that throughout the discussion. While we're looking at that kind of overview of financial planning, right, and financial literacy, as we build that foundation, when we look at an asset versus an expense, how do we teach or reinforce the concepts of assets versus expenses, not enough coffee yet, and healthy debt versus bad debt. Mm-hmm. So you see with influencers and shorts on YouTube and all these avenues for internet, there's so much information out there. So how do we distill out, right? Good debt, bad debt, assets, and expenses? Because I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen where kind of people conflate the two things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Establishing and teaching budgeting skills is a great place to start. And budgeting, it looks different for different people. Okay, so you want to create a budget that has your values. And so when you're talking about money is a limited resource, and you can't buy everything you want or need. And a budget helps you manage that resource. And you need to figure out what's important to you and take time to think about that. And that looks different for everybody, Having a budget will help you develop a roadmap to meet your needs and wants. For instance, if you have a budget where you take your gross income and you take 50% of it for your needs, what your needs would be your rent, your house payment, your insurance, your food, car payment, and things like that. And look down. What is it that you need,
Yeah, just a little follow-on with that. It's an interesting thing where we're even just starting with your income, right? Mm-hmm. And then picking a percentage of that. But what's interesting to me, and this is a little bit off of our questions, but some people have a very detailed line item budget, almost corporate style. Mm-hmm. And my brother and I are very different, right? So for him, it's more of an overarching idea of a budget, right? Mm-hmm. So discretionary spending is completely left on its own line item. Do you have any other suggestions as far as how to determine which one's going to work best for you?
So that's a great question. And figuring out what works best for you is just exploring that, okay? Some people, like you said, are very detailed and they need that step-by-step plan. You know, these are my needs and these are my wants, but that can also fluctuate. You know, your needs and what might be a need for somebody, maybe just a want for somebody else, you know? I guess an example would it'd be somebody might think of Starbucks as a want, and you might think, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about they use it for their me time, for their relaxation. Maybe they go to Starbucks every morning with their husband and wife, and that's their time to communicate and get together. Well, that's more of a need for them in their budget. Where somebody else, that might be a want. Oh, I want to go to Starbucks today, so I have it in my budget to go to Starbucks. So when I'm saying, like, it's flexible, it's not the same for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great bit of insight, right? Because I think a lot of people don't think about that time and carving out that space, right? I know all of us have busy lives and finding that, and that's a great concept even I didn't think about in that lineup, the value of time, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe not so much on the healthy debt versus bad debt, but we read in the news right now all the time. The in vogue thing is inflation, rising interest rates, and rising cost of living. And it's obviously going to affect our producer more than us, right, getting started. What should people consider as they look ahead with this? Focusing on these ideas at 18 or 19 years old. So it's a different concept than when we were young, right? We had low interest rates. And so how we approached our budgeting and figuring out our lifestyle going forward with the rising interest rates and the cost of real estate or rent right now, mm-hmm. What sort of things should the young people start thinking about, the 18, 19-year-olds about to go to college or go out into the working world and get their first jobs?
If somebody had told me about more how important savings was when I was younger, oh my gosh, would I have huge. So I would say savings. Even if you think about what you can spend with $20, okay? You can't spend much with $20, but what if you save $20 over a year? Right. Then you have $1,020. Well, what can you spend with $1,020? It's a lot more than what you can just spend with $20. So that compounds over time. With rising interest rates, the more you have in savings, the more you're going to, the interest is going to help accrue on that. Now, on the backside of that, if you're in debt and interest rates are rising, you're going to spend a lot more money for your wants and your needs. Right. So your dollar has less value.
So let's circle back a little bit to that last question. And you brought up your debts, right? Mm-hmm. You have different types of debts. I've always viewed it as healthy debt versus bad debt, mm-hmm. right? So I always thought of something as like a credit card debt that's a revolving interest, right? That's a bad debt. So does this change now with the rising interest rates? So you have your different categories of debt. So does that change? Maybe like a mortgage, right, would be maybe seen as a healthier debt because you have equity in the house.
Yeah. So anytime you take on a debt, it could be a good debt would be like you're buying your home. Hopefully your home raises in value over time, and so that you get your money back at the end when you retire and downsize or whatever. Also, bad debt. Taking a want and using a credit card to buy it, but you don't pay off your credit card at the end of the month. That's very important. When you use a credit card, it's a tool, okay? So if you're purchasing with the credit card, you want to make sure that every statement cycle you're paying it down to zero, so you're not paying that exorbitant amount of interest on that balance. I mean, Okay, I used my credit card to buy Starbucks, a $7 cup of coffee. Now I'm paying 10 to 20% interest rate on that cup of Starbucks.
Right. Yeah. So, as you're discussing that concept, younger kids may not remember when we were young, right? The savings account was kind of like your financial accumulator, right? You'd spend out and then you replenish it as you could. And using that with the rising interest rates versus using a credit card for that, I guess the emergency savings. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit later, but just touching on that. And as we're going forward, and you brought up savings, right? Mm-hmm. What are your best tips to learn about saving and spending, then advancing, right, to add in things like retirement, the different healthcare plans that we have out there? There's a menu now of retirement plans and healthcare plans, as well as healthcare savings, right?
Yeah. So when I go back to the budgeting, and you have 50% for your needs, 30% for your wants, well, that leaves 20% still, and that's for your savings. And so with your savings, you're going to end up saving for. First thing you want to save for is your emergency fund. So your emergency fund would be if something should happen to you, you get sick, you lose your job, you want to have some money set back to pay for your expenses, for your needs, okay? But you also want to have small savings goals. So when your phone breaks, you have savings set up, and it's not an expense or a detriment to you that you break your phone. You can now have money set aside to get a new phone. And so you want to have small savings goals. And I think a small savings goal is good for teaching young kids, too, how to save and showing them, bringing them into the conversation at a young age. Maybe you're saving for a vacation to Disney. Let them know that you're saving for a vacation to Disney, and you'll be surprised at how much they'll want to pitch in and save with you. Right.
And just going on that theme just a little bit more, if you don't mind, you were talking about the savings and the 50-30-20 mm-hmm. Breakdown. Mm-hmm. So maybe a young adult starting out, mm-hmm. right? They're getting their first apartment. You have to get a car, and you have all these things to balance. Mm-hmm. So when we start cutting into stuff, we're looking at this budget. You maybe don't have that. It's maybe 80% for your needs. The housing and utilities and all that, and food, right? So where do when we get down to that last 50%? The ideal budget. Where do we balance out that want versus savings? What advice would you have for somebody starting out and they're putting 80% into that? So where would the priorities be for that other little bit?
Great question. So if you are having a want, ask yourself, do I need it now or do I want it? And can I save up for later? And if you can save up for later, then you're going to save yourself a lot in the long run. And no, it's not easy, it's not perfect, but as you have a game plan and a goal to shoot for, you'll find yourself in a lot better place than if you're just, I want this, I want that, I want this. You're going to find yourself living beyond your means.
Right. And, a lot of the workplaces have that matching for the 401k, and you were talking earlier about the compounding interest, right? So when we get into that 3% match or whatever your employer does, right? Do you put that under the need of the budget, or do you put that under the savings part of the budget?
I put that under the savings part of the budget. Also, because you're good when you're thinking about savings, paying yourself first is another way to say that.
Right.
Because you're paying your future person, your future for your future.
Right. And we're talking about that savings as a financial accumulator, an emergency fund. You brought up the cell phones, things we didn't have years ago. What sort of, when we envision it and we mind map what we're going to save, what sort of pad looks comfortable these days for somebody starting out? Because you have the iPhone, and the newer ones are not inexpensive, and you have the option to purchase insurance for it. You have the option to save up and do an upgrade. So when we're looking at those sort of things, what should we, the young people starting out, you're leaving high school and you're going to college, you're getting that first job. Where should your priority be in that? Because that could be pretty open-ended, right? You have a retirement long-term goal, but your short-term goals, right? As you're starting housing and you're doing deposits for utilities and all that stuff we've all been through. Today, the additional things, you can't live without your cell phone. You can't live without the internet. So what sort of emergency contingencies do we think about? Well, obviously car repairs and or transport. What sort of things do we think about now as our baseline savings goals?
So you're talking about your emergency, having a 3 to 6 months on the emergency fund. So what you want to do is you want to take your needs and add it all up. What do you? This reminds me of I have a 24-year-old daughter, and when she was at Bainbridge High School, they taught personal finance class, and one of the things that Mrs. Rose had them do is come up with an ideal budget of what you wanted. I think she gave them career cards, and they had to figure out what within their budget income that they could afford, what kind of house they could afford, what kind of car they could drive, how much insurance would cost, how much they want to spend on meals, what would be the electric payment, where would they live. Where you live has a big effect on how much money you make, how much the cost of living is. And so come up with that ideal budget, and then take that and add that, times that by 3. That's how much it would cost to live on 3 months. Okay, then take that number and look at your budget and see, well, can I afford to put $50 away towards that emergency fund? It might take you a year or 2 years to come up with that emergency fund. But if you didn't start saving it, you wouldn't have anything for an emergency. But if you start saving and then you find yourself in an emergency, well, it's better to have something than nothing.
Yeah, so at least just start chipping away at it with what you can afford, right? $5, $10 here and there.
Yes, it's amazing how much $5 over time adds up.
Right. And this kind of leads us forward into more budgeting categories. There's a lot of financial services, right? We touched at the beginning, like Zelle, Venmo. We have all the apps, right? We wrap Starbucks. Not sponsored, but I'll bet you that BYS would love a grant. But I travel all over the world, so I have stuff. I have money sitting on the card for a Hong Kong subway. So as somebody starting out, and even for the parents now, because we're dealing with the same thing, right? We've all started together with this. How do we manage that, right? How do we account for basically parked cash?
That's a great question. So what apps are they're just tools. And so because there are tools, you're going to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. There's a lot of great apps for young adults just starting out. There's NerdWallet to help you pick out what your first credit card will be in establishing credit. There is Chime also for building a credit score. There's also Acorns for people who are interested in learning to invest. They're all apps. This is all a fairly new technology, so do your research. They are not highly government regulated.
Right. So there's none of the FDIC coverage. And so even in that, right, we have the two different verticals. We have the financial services, and then we have the company, right? The gift card, right? Traditionally be a gift card, but now it's electronic.
Yeah.
And companies love those because you buy gift cards for, I know you don't have any in your junk drawer, but we have a stack of gift cards that we have in our junk drawer. Those are easy to keep track of because you open that and you have movie passes or whatever. But is there some way to manage that, maybe as a young person looking at your budget, incorporating it into that master plan? Have you run across any techniques or other tools, right, available online now to help control all that? What do you do?
Milagro Castier here, producer. Want to make sure I get introduced. So for me, when it comes to gift cards and everything, and kind of just managing those, like I actually have come up through like physical gift cards still.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's a majority of the gift cards I still get, and I mean I think it's because of family, you know, and family just gifting me those, and like for me, it's easier to manage the physical versus the digital, and I think with the digital, at least to my knowledge, there still isn't an easy way to manage it because it's still in the sort of ethereal kind of sense of the internet.
Yeah.
Like there isn't, since there is no physicality to the internet, and it makes it more difficult to place something in a digital wallet, because the digital wallet itself is impermanent. It's not physical. You can't just take it out of the internet ecosystem and say, okay, this is now a thing I hold. And so like I prefer to keep to like physical cards, printouts when I can, ways to make things more physical, so that way I have the actual reminder in my hands of this is where that money is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you do the Zelle and the Cash App and Venmo and all that good?
I try to avoid using that as much.
Okay.
Sometimes it's easy, like with Cash App or with Venmo. Like it's easy. That's a quick way to kind of like send money to a friend that for like paying back like them getting a coffee order for you. But I try to keep money off of those because since it's all digital, it's easy it can be easy for me to close an app and then forget that, oh, there's money in that app.
Yes.
So yeah, I try to keep things away from try to keep storing money away from apps, so that way I can just consolidate all of my finances.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating. My son has a lot of stuff too where he kind of goes old school because they grew up with all that stuff. For those Gen Xers, it's totally novel, right? So we're like, this is cool and new, and it's like getting CDs at a record store. Kids, that's how we used to get music. So yeah, it's interesting to see some of this stuff come around where the generation that grew up with the internet, you guys have a completely different approach and probably far better than ours. But thanks for piping in. I appreciate that. So I think moving on a little bit.
I'll just say with Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, send money to people you know. If somebody is asking you for money, think of it this way. Would you hand that person money if they were in front of you and they were asking you, it was a stranger asking you for money? Or would you put that cash in an envelope and mail it to them? If the answer is no, do not send them money with Zelle, Venmo. You cannot get that money back.
Yeah, I think there's a whole subreddit about people wanting Cash App for their bachelorette parties and stuff. Anyway, that's great advice. Great advice. So yeah, treat those apps like cash, right? Mm-hmm. So moving on, we're going to go from cash back to debt a little bit, right? Most of us use credit cards, home loans, student loans. Student loans, right? Really hot right now. Do you have any advice on how to evaluate and order loans, right? So when you want to retire the debt, if you as you progress in your career and you get more successful, you
take on more debt. But then you also get in that position where you've saved and you've done all that stuff. You have your savings and your retirement well away. Now it's time to start retiring debt. How do you evaluate which debt to retire first? That's a great question. Basically, there's two ways to evaluate it. You can pay down the debt with the highest interest rate first. So you're going to be making the minimum payment on all your debt. and then start, let's say you have $100 left over. So you're going to start putting that extra $100 on the principal of the debt with the highest interest rate. And then you're going to keep doing that until that debt is paid off with the one with the highest interest rate. And then you're going to take the minimum and the extra $100 that you're paying on that one, and you're going to start on the next one with the highest interest rate. The other way is more psychological, and that would be the snowball effect, where you're going to take the debt with the lowest dollar amount, and you're going to pay it off first because it feels better to have, instead of having 4 lines of debt, you now have 3 lines of debt. Whichever makes you feel more comfortable, it's up to you. I will say paying the one off with the highest interest rate first will save you time and save you interest in the long run.
Okay. It's interesting because you have all the different modes, and you have the microloans now and stuff like that. It's interesting that the old rules still apply, right? I know when as Gen Xers were young, our parents would give us a little piggy bank to hold on to stuff, or take us to the bank to sit down, open the savings account. You sign the papers at a desk, and the bank manager was always so cordial to the young
It's still
person.
one of my favorite things to do is opening savings account or checking accounts for young adults. I love helping them open their first accounts.
And but now with the credit cards, so for example, we recently added my oldest as an authorized user in the credit card. When we had the old savings passbook, and you get your first little checkbook with the 30 checks in it or whatever, right? You kept a real running total. You had the check ledger at the top, and you knew exactly. As our children are getting that first credit card, right? The invisible money. Oh, it passes through. I have this much credit. I can spend that. Do you have any advice on not just teaching that discipline for the credit card, but when to extend that? When do you go for that credit limit because maybe you don't have that savings? How do you approach that sort of stuff? So any advice on as the youth getting that first credit card, an authorized user, and getting that discipline of what to use a credit card for and when to extend, right? Because that's really high interest. So is there any discussion in the financial industry about how to teach the young people?
So this is what I have told my nieces and my nephews when they ask me about getting their first credit card. And I get really real with them. I'm like, what do you have in your savings account? Are you being mature enough to handle debt? Okay. If you aren't mature enough to be able to save a little, can you be honest with yourself and say, how much are you going to be mature enough to not take that money that's not yours, right, and spend?
Yeah, no, and that's a great way of looking at it. And it's interesting because the credit score now is important, because the better your credit score, the better your interest rate on your home loans and your car loans and all that good stuff. And so you have to build that credit line to get the lower interest rate. So it's an interesting balance, but that's also a good way of looking at it, right? Do you have the savings discipline, and can you think of it as real cash in hand, almost like the Venmo, right? Mm-hmm. Would you hand that cash to somebody?
Building a credit score is very important, but also having the discipline to be able to go out and get a job and keep a job. That's a learning skill.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember having this conversation with my niece, and she was like, I'm just so mad they won't give me a credit card. I was like, well, why do you think you should get a credit card? Do you have a job that you can repay back that debt? And, it was a really heart-to-heart conversation I had with her. And once she understood, that a credit card is actually, they're lending you money, and it's not just something that they deserve, but it's something that you mature into, is taking responsibility and working towards that.
Yeah, managing the budget, right?
Managing it, yes.
And
living within your means. You don't want to set up a bad habit of living beyond your means.
Yeah, I think when I was in college, the credit cards were still, they were coming out to the masses, right? So it was easy to get that $500 credit limit. Where now I think the pre-approvals are pretty high. You know, that $500 limit for a college kid was well within the budget. So if you did mess up, you know, you weren't penalized too badly. It just got declined.
So a credit card is a tool. So just because a credit card company gives you a big line of credit, you can ask to get that line of credit reduced also. Also, you don't want to hold more than 30% of that line of credit on that credit card because you want it to help you build and establish credit,
right,
so that you show that you are able to handle it.
So you should target 30%, right, of your credit limit and pay off to establish that credit.
You should be paying off your credit card.
Well, pay off the credit card every month, but use 30% of the limit a month to pay it off.
Yeah.
Okay, I hadn't heard that rule before. That's fantastic. Have you heard that? No. See, these are the financial tips we're here for, and it's free. Just download the podcast on Spotify, right, Shannon?
Yeah.
Shannon loves that plug.
Thank you, Martin.
That's what I'm here for. And now, so we've kind of gone through a lot of this stuff. You know, we've had a nice discussion about budgeting concepts, Zelle, you know, all these cash apps, which don't go to the credit score, right? So you could be moving, and you could be quite credit worthy moving cash on the cash apps, and that doesn't help you with a home loan.
And it doesn't help you, does it have interest?
And it doesn't have interest. So it's just like cash sitting under the mattress, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And now as they go out to get their jobs, now's the maybe not the elephant in the room, but the thing, right, was that the only two things are true in life, death and taxes. So we know that, you know, hashtag consult a professional. But the first time you sat down, and I remember this in 1900 or something, they sit down, you get your first job. I think I was bagging groceries at a grocery store, and they give me these tax forms to fill out at 16, right?
Yeah.
So what is a W-4, and what should our young adults think about when they're filling out the first one? Of course, we're not looking for tax advice, but you're 16, you're sitting down, you're so happy you got that first job, and they gave you this form of withholdings and stuff like that.
So I am a banker. I am not a tax advisor. So I went to Eric Edenholm, who is a CPA here on the island, and I said, well, what do you think I should say? He says a W-4 is how you instruct IRS to withhold taxes from your paycheck. Now, when you're a young adult, you don't have that much, so just follow what the W-2 is. If you're, you know, zero dependents and there's just you, it's
mark a zero.
Mark a zero.
Okay, so just keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Pay more up front, and because you don't want that tax surprise in April when you get on your TurboTax and fill it out.
Exactly. The goal is you should have enough money taken out of each check so you don't owe additional money to the IRS at the end of the year when you file your taxes.
And just starting out, that's the simplest way to do it. And if you get that refund because you overpay, go straight to the savings, not for a boat.
Exactly.
Is that a personal experience?
No, I don't have a boat, Shannon. I have friends with boats. That's the best way to go about it, right?
Okay.
So I think that's kind of my list. Anybody have anything?
Do you guys have any questions?
Do you have any questions? You're thinking on it.
I think I might have a question before things wrap up. So I have friends and people that I know that sometimes they've hit that rough patch where the emergency fund kind of kicks in, and I guess my question kind of relates to when you've been sort of in that emergency fund state of mind where you're like conserving and there isn't much coming in. I feel like it can be easy to sort of forget the stepping stones to rebuilding. So I guess what would your sort of, if you have any, what tips would you have for pulling someone out of the emergency fund phase and getting them to think, to switch their thinking back to, healthy saving habits, instead of just living by the, grit of your teeth. Like, what would you say to someone who is sort of still in that mindset of, I'm on my emergency fund, and how to get them to think more about healthy saving?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. By the way, I love how we were talking about digital, and you were saying I like to have it in front of me. I like the physical, and something as simple as the envelopes. Budgeting with your envelopes. You put your grocery money in this envelope. You put your rent in this envelope, and I think that's a great idea, because that is just like, sometimes you have to go back to the simple basics. But if we're talking about a friend, the best thing I find is staying on your own paper and being an example in your own in your life, but also just being grateful for who they are, where they're at in life, and showing gratitude to them, because sometimes that can uplift somebody out of where they're at, because they know that you believe in them, because we all go through things.
All right. Thank you for that.
That's a great question. We all go through and we've all been through those phases. So if you haven't yet, you will, and having to strip down and start over it's more psychology, I think, than it is like you need to do it, but you got scared, right? Like I've had that years ago, and you got down to $500, $200, $100 left, right? And you're just struggling by the grit of your teeth. But yeah, for me, it was as much psychological as anything, right? It wasn't so much I knew I had to budget. I was disciplined, but it was very difficult to do.
I had one thing that I wanted to just kind of clarify, listening to both of you talk throughout this, and then Margaret's comment about seeing physical gift cards and things. I was thinking, with all these new apps that we have and new ways to do things, it sounds to me, though, like financial security comes from principles that we've known for years and years and years. So it still goes back to saving and having a budget and knowing where your money is going and making decisions about where you want your money to go. And that could look different for every person, but just being aware and all that. So it sounds like these bedrock principles are the same, whether we were in 1970 whatever or in 2023. We just have a bunch of different tools and ways to do that, but those principles are still the same. Is that what you would say? I
would say that. I mean, we have a lot of great tools out there. You just need to find what tools work for you. And it could be the simple envelopes, physical cash in envelopes, and that's how you keep your budget. It could be going and doing acorns. There's so many great things. It could be just, reconciling your checkbook every month and looking at what your expenses are, what your savings is, and also looking at it every once in a great while. What you needed a year ago might not be what you need today, and so you change over time, and so does your budgeting and your needs and your wants.
So yeah, that's interesting. I'm sitting here thinking as you guys are talking, and the fundamentals remain the same. There's a lot of ways to make money. There's a lot of ways to spend it, as long as your needs are covered. The tools have changed, but you always need to reevaluate, right? What was true 20 years ago and 30 years ago, it all changes. So you want to have your roots in the ground, but you want to keep growing towards the sky, right? Because we have these tools now, but another 5 years, 10 years, they're going to be different. And especially with the apps that go up and they crash. Financial services is all the rage right now. So, it's interesting because I was thinking through my life, how did I get to be here, right? Like, there's a lot of changes job changes, income changes, kids, marriage, and you do reevaluate all that. But if you have those foundational principles, and you commit yourself to doing that, it makes it a lot easier.
Even it dawned on me, flexibility, as Aalesa was talking, and then as you were talking, Martin, I realized when I was young, you used a checkbook. You got a checkbook. You learned how to write out a check. You gave a check. Well, my kids don't use checkbooks. My kids do all automatic, take a picture of the check, deposit it online, right?
Right. Yeah.
They don't even have a checkbook. And in fact, one of my kids had a rental situation where the landlord wanted a physical check. So then, like, we'll have to go to the bank and get new checks to be able to pay the rent because they won't accept an electronic payment, right? And so even being flexible enough to adjust for those tools or how things are done, but keeping those principles.
We'll even bring it back to that, right? Every time we write a check and you wrote in the ledger, you saw your finances every day. You knew what your spending money was. You got your statement in the mail for the bank account, and you knew what your savings account was, how much, because you got that every month.
Right.
Where now you get one of 1,000 emails a day, marked unread, slide left, it goes in the trash can. And so you're not as involved day to day with your finances. You go tap with your watch, tap with your phone, and it's less painful than taking a handful of cash and handing it to someone, but it's a lot easier, but you're not as involved, right? So I think probably, for the, and son, if you're listening, this applies to you too, find a way to make sure you know how much you have at all times.
And a good way to track your expenses is use one debit card or one credit card. And then because your online banking has a little financial thing that will show you your expenses.
Yeah.
It has
Like categorize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we do that.
I'm embarrassed to say I haven't yet looked for that. I should look for that.
It's handy until you buy something and it miscategorizes it, and you're like, why did I spend $1,000 on gas at this thing? And you bought something else that was a related company, and it miscategorizes it. But it does give you the overview, kind of like, because we do the same thing. We get one credit card, so it's like your checkbook every month, and you keep in and out. But I have apps for public transport all over the places I go once, 2-3 times a year, or 3 times a month. And when you get there, you currency conversion. So there are a lot of ancillaries to keep track of, but the credit card thing is great.
Good deal. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Martin and Aalesa, for allowing us to be a part of your conversation today. And thanks, Milagro, for chiming in as well. Thank you all who have joined us. We hope that this conversation proves to be of benefit to you in your parenting, and we leave you with the foundation that healthy youth begin with healthy families, and healthy families build healthy communities. BYS is a nonprofit organization that is supported by community members like you. For more information, please visit AskBYS.org. We thank Milagro Castilleja for producing our show. Another big thanks to Martin, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network, for their generosity in allowing us to record in their media arts studio.